The Second South African War marks an important period in the history of the Afrikaner people. Before the war, many Afrikaners faced significant disadvantages. They were often discriminated against, which limited their opportunities for advancement. Most of the few well-off Afrikaners were involved in agriculture. Meanwhile, the English-speaking white population, particularly the Jewish community, dominated the economy and politics with support from the Western powers and investors. The economic depression of the early 1930s forced many Afrikaners to leave their farms and move to cities, lacking the skills needed to succeed in a competitive urban environment. Many were relegated to low-paying jobs. By 1939, nearly 40% of urbanized Afrikaner men worked in occupations such as manual labor, mining, railway work, and bricklaying. A well-known Afrikaner communist of back then, Dan du Plessis, observed that real power in the country was not held by parliament or the cabinet, but by the capitalists. He argued that these capitalists fuel racial hatred amongst workers to maximize profits. Now, the system of low wages suppressed both black workers and poor Afrikaners. Now, du Plessis called on workers to unite, overthrow the capitalist system and replace it with communism. The Afrikaners distrusted the West and the capitalist system, which they saw as the root of their poverty. In response, they sought to separate themselves from this system and build one that prioritized their interests. After the war, the British government realized that their system of oppressing both blacks and Afrikaners was unsustainable. They feared that continued oppression might unite these groups against them, leading to even greater problems. Now, to avoid this, they began slowly integrating Afrikaners into positions of power politically. The Afrikaners gradually gained political ground, winning their first election in 1924. Now, in 1928, the government created ISCO, a state-owned steel company managed largely by Afrikaners. Initially, the Afrikaners aimed to nationalize the country's resources, similar to the ideas proposed by Julius Malema today. However, once they gained a taste of power, they abandoned those plans. The Broederbond, aka the Brotherhood of Power, was a secret society that promoted Afrikaner nationalism by preserving Afrikaner culture and ultimately gaining control of the South African government and economy. Membership was by invitation only, restricted to Afrikaner men over the age of 25. This organization was the real power behind the apartheid system, not the official cabinet. It was considered one of the most influential secret societies in the world. Membership was highly exclusive. Women, black people, Jews, Catholics, divorcees, and Afrikaners who did not regularly attend church were strictly prohibited from joining. Any Afrikaner men hoping to be accepted into the Brotherhood needed to avoid marrying an English-speaking white woman, let alone a woman of color. Those who made it into the Broederbond were part of an elite castle of privileged and politically influential Afrikaners. Now, the organization's motto, Wees sterk, be strong, embodied the ideals its members were expected to uphold. Membership visually guaranteed wealth and power, as it connected individuals to a vast and influential network. The Broederbond was the real Afrikaner Mafia, due to its control over various aspects of society. This secretive organization was the driving force that ultimately put Afrikaners in control of South Africa. From 1948 to 1994, every South African president was a member of the Broederbond, including the late President F.W. de Klerk, who joined at the unusually young age of 27 in 1964. Beyond politics, the Broederbond operated through covert channels to ensure its influence extended to key areas of society, including the civil service, judiciary, academia, church, police, sports associations, and city councils. They even controlled the Bantu administration boards, which governed life in black townships, ensuring that apartheid policies were upheld across all levels of government and society. Volkskapitalisme, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but it stands for the people's capitalism, was an economic ideology aimed at improving the economic conditions of Afrikaners. Now, the Broederbond introduced this concept in 1939. Hendrik Verwoerd, often called the architect of apartheid, organized the first economic congress of the people, where the Afrikaners were encouraged to unite and pool their resources to uplift their community economically. Over time, this movement led to the creation of key institutions such as Volkskas Bank and Sanlam. Now, Volkskas, meaning the People's Bank, which actually later became ABSA, was founded in 1934 in Pretoria as a cooperative loan bank. It provided financial services to Afrikaners who had moved from rural areas to the cities due to the Great Depression. Now, similarly, Sanlam was established as an insurance and investment company to serve the needs of the Afrikaner community. These institutions played a crucial role in consolidating the Afrikaners community's power during the apartheid era. They were largely controlled by and for the benefit of the Afrikaner community, strengthening their financial position within South Africa. Anton Rupert and Hendrik Verwoerd never got along, as they had vastly different political ideologies. I'll explain later in the video how Verwoerd's policies almost cost Anton his company. Now, despite their differences, Anton was a member of the Broederbond as well. His early business partners were Dag Hertzog and Nico Dederiks. Now, Nico later became South Africa's Minister of Finance. In 1940, Anton started a dry cleaning business in Pretoria and left his chemistry studies to join an Afrikaner organization called the Remrandt Bond, meaning the Rescue Action League. Now, this organization was one of the initiatives born from the First Economic Congress of the People, aimed at uplifting poor white Afrikaners. Now, Anton was tasked with leading the business section of the organization in Johannesburg, where he evaluated and approved loans for small businesses. Many of these businesses, they failed, but this role likely introduced Anton to the broader world of business. Despite the Afrikaners gaining political power, economic dominance remained elusive. 30 years after they took control of the government, Afrikaner-owned businesses were still few and far between. The business sector was largely dominated by English-speaking South Africans and Jewish entrepreneurs. The Afrikaner businesses that did succeed included Nasionale Pers, which is Naspers, Sanlam, Santam, Volkskas, and Voortrekker Pers, which was another media publication. By the late 1930s, Afrikaner capital accounted for only 5% of the country's total turnover. Organizations like the Remrandt Bond worked to encourage Afrikaners or young Afrikaner entrepreneurs to enter the business world and compete with English businesses. Through the Remrandt Bond organization, Anton Rupert discovered a bankrupt tobacco company in Paarl, about 40 minutes from Cape Town, called Broederbond. Now, together with his partners, Nico Dederiks and AJ Stolz, who later became a member of parliament. Now, Anton raised funds from the Afrikaner community, primarily old wine and tobacco farmers. He also invested £10,000 of his own money to purchase the business. At the time, the tobacco industry was dominated by large English-owned companies, making it difficult for newcomers to enter the market. Many Afrikaner farmers were being underpaid for their tobacco by these major companies. Now, Anton saw an opportunity to support these farmers by offering them fair prices for their crops. In turn, they supported him by selling their tobacco to his company, seeing him as one of their own. This strategy succeeded because of the shared mission within the Afrikaner community to uplift each other economically. Through the same Remrandt Bond organization, Anton also acquired another bankrupt company in Stellenbosch. He purchased its assets and machinery, transforming it into the Distillers Corporation. Now, Western Cape farmers invested in this venture, officially making the Rupert's family's entry into the liquor and cigarettes industry, which is big bucks. Anton was a marketing and branding genius. He had a knack for taking ordinary products and making them highly appealing through innovative marketing and design. He was meticulous about every product launch, always striving to improve marketing campaigns and brand designs. The Distillers Corporation became the first Afrikaner company to be listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in 1945, 31 years after the Afrikaners gained political power in 1924. Now in 1948, just a week after D.F. Malan's National Party won the elections, Remrandt and Anton's company produced its first cigarette. In 1953, Remrandt made its first major move on the international stages by acquiring Rothmans, one of the most prestigious tobacco companies in the UK. The owner of Rothmans, a friend of Anton Rupert, was on the verge of selling the family business to a rival due to financial difficulties. Now Rupert stepped in with an offer of £750,000 for the company. After the deal was agreed upon, Anton contributed £50,000 of his own money and turned to his Afrikaner Connect, Sanlam and Volkskas to secure the remaining £700,000 as a loan. Now this acquisition marked the beginning of the Rupert's business empire worldwide. The Rothmans deal gave Rupert a solid base to expand into European and global markets. Now the company saw massive success with their launch of the Peter Stuyvesant cigarette brand in 1954, thanks to Anton's exceptional marketing and branding expertise. Now Peter Stuyvesant became a global hit, achieving significant sales growth in Europe, North America, Africa and Australia. In its first year alone, sales skyrocketed by over 4,700%. These guys made a killing. Anton Rupert's success inspired a generation of Afrikaner businessmen, proving that they could compete and thrive in an economy dominated by English and Jewish interest. Now Rupert became the first internationally recognized Afrikaner businessman, making Stellenbosch his home base. It's fair to say that Anton Rupert was the original Stellenbosch Mafia. Remgro is arguably the leading enterprise in Stellenbosch, with vast interest across multiple industries. It is one of South Africa's most successful investment companies, often referred to by Julius Malema as part of white monopoly capital. Now, one of its vast valuable ventures is Mediclinic, in which Remgro owns a 44% stake. Now, Mediclinic is the largest private hospital group listed on the JSE, with a market capitalization of 76 billion rands, but I'm sure it's more by now. Edwin Hertzog, the founder of Mediclinic, also serves as the deputy chairman of Remgro's board. Now Hertzog has been a core member of the Remgro's team since its early days. Basically, Hertzog is a Remgro day one soldier, even before Johan Rupert joined the family business. Now the Hertzog Family Trust was one of the founding shareholders of Richemont, now a Swiss-based luxury goods company which is owned by the Ruperts. Now this is before Johan Rupert bought their shares out. Now this long-standing relationship between the Herzogs and the Ruperts reflects their deep historical ties from back then. Edwin Hertzog was the visionary behind Mediclinic's success, with the support of the Remgro Group, of course. Now Mediclinic has grown to operate about 53 private hospitals and has expanded its footprint internationally. The company holds significant investments in the UK, Switzerland and the Middle East, where it has become a major player in the private healthcare industry. These guys are making big bucks overseas. Other companies with roots in Remgro's network includes Capitec Bank, which I'll cover in a future video, and PSG, another successful venture born from the Remgro soldiers. Johan Rupert attended Paul Ross Gymnasium and later studied economics and company law at the University of Stellenbosch. Now, during his studies, he discovered his passion for finance and entrepreneurship, so he eventually dropped out of university to pursue his ambitions. After leaving university, Johan moved to New York, where he joined Chase Manhattan Bank, now JP Morgan Chase, and worked there for 2 years. Now, during this time, David Rockefeller, a family friend, was his boss. He then joined Lazard Ferrer, a financial advisory and asset management firm, where he worked for another 3 years. In 1979, Johan returned to South Africa and established Rand Merchant Bank, which he managed until 1984. Johan joined the family business Remrandt in 1984 to address a crisis his father Anton Rupert was facing at Rothmans International in London. Anton was losing control of the company due to the conflicts with partners on the board. This was because of a particularly challenging time for South African businesses, as the country was in turmoil. Apartheid was at its peak under P.W. Botha, with widespread violence, burning townships, and part of the country becoming ungovernable. International sanctions further strained South African companies and also South African businessmen, including Rupert, who was running this big company, which was then a leading player in the global cigarette industry, thanks to his efforts. The situation escalated into a cold war in the boardroom, as the opposing board members attempted to oust Anton. Now, according to Johan, this move was more personal than political. With Johan's involvement, the family eventually regained control by removing those board members on the board. And these guys were people who Anton himself invited into the board in the beginning. Now they were trying to get him out and take his company because he was Afrikaans and he was assumed to be part of the problem. Johan Rupert has been South Africa's highest individual taxpayer for the past 20 years. His family businesses are amongst the largest contributors of dividends from international operations back into South Africa, surpassing the combined contributions of the rest of the JSE-listed companies. In 2015, the Center for Competition, Regulation and Development at the University of Johannesburg conducted a study that revealed that Remgro's investments provided it with influence over firms with a combined market capitalization of 1.3 trillion rands. Now today, only 10 companies listed on the JSE existed 80 years ago, and Remgro is one of them. Anton Rupert was a key figure in an Afrikaner initiative that succeeded. He was a member of the Broederbond and had strong connections with influential figures in the National Party. Both his father and mother were involved with the National Party, giving him access to a powerful network of people. Additionally, during that era, less than half of South Africa's population was actively participating in the economy, which created opportunities that worked in his favor.